really wonderful discussions, and I'm hoping just to add new aspects to it. I'm hoping I will, but a lot of them connect also to the discussions yesterday. So if you had the benefit of having been here yesterday, so you'll see there's some interesting links that we can make. So I will, I worked at the Natural History Museum as a curator of contemporary art, 2005 to 13. So you will see, I'm afraid to say you will see the Natural History Museum London again. It does have a presence. There was the British Empire, and so it has plays a rather significant role. And also, I would talk about a project there, but I would also talk about a project within the museum, but also a project that took place outside of the walls of the museum, which will be an interesting discussion to have as well in relation to your exhibition projects of where do you see what. Let me start. I wanted just to use the word activations because I think it's really important that we keep on thinking about the collections that we work with the institutions that we work with, and the buildings as transitional. So that's kind of fundamental to how I would like to sort of think about all of these projects I'm going to present today. So I'm starting off with this slide here by one of the artists who's part of the program we're going to talk about in a minute. And there are two significant institutions here, Kew Gardens there in the top left, and the Natural History Museum on here in the right. So I will concentrate on representations, but I will discuss the processes. And I've been asked particularly to talk about the how. How do you do this? How do you do programs like that? And it was really lucky in a way that I was able to run a program over 3 years. It was quite specific. The parameters were quite set, and there was also an evaluation as part of that. So I will use it to take it as a lens, as to talk about institutions, audiences, and institution meaning members of staff who work there. And I would also like to sort of stress that institutions are not homogeneous. They are made up out of people. So there are always a range of people, as we could see with Miranda as well. People bring things into the institution. So, and I think that was the same in this program as well. That I could very much work with the interest and heterogeneity of the institution. So. Maybe also to say there will be one slide you might feel a bit of a discomfort. This is in relation to Daniel Boyd's work. I'll let you know, because he also worked on human remains. You won't see any. But also the fun of this presentation, in a way, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors as well. So things might not always be what they appear to be. So this is quite important in working with artists, because actually we have a whole new range of languages we can start to play with today, which is humor and an audacity of stepping across institutional boundaries and being external agents, as it were. They could bring with them a quite different energy that you have, or sometimes you end up grinding into when you work within an institution. So I felt yesterday, but after the interesting discussions that we had, I felt I needed to ground myself again in what do we mean by decolonizing. So I just have a couple of slides here. You forgive me, but this is also, I use this, I always like this quote by Walter de Mignolo, the Argentinian scholar Walter Mignolo, and then I've got one other slide, so forgive me if you feel like, oh, this is all so old hat, but it helped me just to bring some guidelines again into the projects we'll discuss afterwards. So decoloniality operates on pluriversality and truth, and not in universality and truth. Decoloniality's first moves around should be those of delinking. Secondly, it should strive for re-existence. Re-existing is something other than resisting. So we will have a look at that, how these sort of processes of delinking can operate, and how a sort of reclaim and re-existings can come into being. And and also these sort of aspects which I thought about is sort of how to how to work out. I put this together last night. So how do you frame the decolonizing debates within museums in particular. And so a term here, reclaiming, with a former trustee of the British Museum, Bonnie Greer, has used reclaiming, meaning exploration of issues of identity, belonging, diversity, is of key in this program here, and acknowledging how a museum has benefited from a racist and colonial past, foregrounding submerged perspectives with the scholar Gomez Barris, who's an environmental humanities scholar, uses. So bringing to the fore perspectives of non-Western perspective, indigenous and so on. And an effective or active engagement with affected groups and individuals is also something that we work with quite a bit in this program. And then lastly, undisciplinary knowledge. I think this is sort of the big theme, I think, of yesterday, which we can work through here as well. So transitional process is really quite key, and what this program became an opportunity to do really was to do three things: is just to recognize and to acknowledge, and then to reflect and to change. So the questions really that guided it were: how can the violence of past collecting and collecting practices in the natural sciences be acknowledged? How can these practices be reflected upon now? And what constitutes change in an institution? So, museums are dynamic. We've come to sort of understand that. And this dynamic here came to be, and also maybe quite interesting as well, just to at some point reflect upon the dates of this program, because really the term decolonizing wasn't on anybody's mind in this respect in the museum. But also what was on anybody's mind was for the Natural History Museum to explore the linkage between imperial histories and colonial histories. It just wasn't talked about. As Miranda mentioned yesterday, there was the 2007 project of the history of the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade. It was really important and started to bring in different voices. But it was a beginning that sort of could unravel quite quickly again. So here we are in 2010. You obviously have to think there's a period preceding that where you had to sort of raise the idea, get your museum enthusiastic for this kind of program. You have to raise the funds for it, so it was only possible. I was employed by the museum, so that's a good thing, just to have some continuity, but the funding was external. It came from the Arts Council and the Gallus-Gulbenkian Foundation. But then also just to sort of say, what kind of program does it need? And also, it was always supposed to be a program where the museum offers itself as a place to do research for artists, but also have the opportunity to show the results of this research. And so for Curated City, there was a new gallery was planned, the Images of Nature Gallery. So that was quite an important new development, and also a gallery. Natural history museums, often they're just pitched as being for children, which is obviously, we know, it's not just the only audience. But this gallery, Images of Nature Gallery, was also deliberately putting forward, talking to an adult audience. And it was exploring something which hadn't really been shown, which is a enormous scientific illustration, historic scientific illustration collection with the museum holds, about 200,000 odd drawings from significant, present a significant record of how science and how collecting was conducted from the 1700s onwards. So it's a rather large institution, it's a rather large collection, even that illustration collection is quite large. So there were some parameters were set for the artists, because so I'm trying to sort of open the doors to this, but at the same time, you always have to close it down again, because there are issues of timing. So at this time, artists couldn't really come into the country for very long. That was hugely restricted because of visa conditions for 3 months. So there was, it was understanding it would be 3 months. And also I set up a partnership with a studio organization, because when the artists would come to the UK, there was we wanted to have artists whose work, or who would come from areas or geopolitical areas from which the collections are in the museum. So, and there's significant collections. So it's China, India, and Australia. So this was another parameter. And then the other one was that it shouldn't be an artist who hadn't been really to London before, hadn't sort of done this kind of work before, so a really fresh set of eyes. Was that fair? I mean, we sort of, we ran interesting selection processes, particularly in the countries from where we wanted the artists to come. And then importantly, I set up a partnership with a studio organization called Gasworks, which is based in London, not very far from the museum, because I wanted the artists to have an environment in where they could be artists. So that they wouldn't be completely, have to immerse themselves in the institution of the Natural History Museum. Because we also anticipated this might not be easy, this might be difficult for them. And we can talk about these structures later also, because of the funding, what I was also unhappy about was the nature of the dialogues we had to create. It just meant the artist comes to London and spends time there. It wasn't the other way around. There wasn't a way to go to Australia or to bring things over and so on. So this is another restriction that we work with, and that determined the conversation. And also it might have reinforced the power relationship that might have been that the artist wanted to argue with. So just to run you through very briefly, so we have got Hu Yun, who came from Shanghai, who spent the first residency in the museum. And he was particularly asked, but not limited to. I mean, I thought that's understood. There's a way of saying, well, you might know something that we don't know, you might be particularly interested, but, feel free to broaden out. And, there were lots of field trips into the archive for the museum as part of it. Then the second year was Daniel Boyd. He's from Sydney. And his communities are the Kujala, Eastern Kukulanja, Kongulu, Dagara, Banjalung, Kukujongan, North Pentecost Islands, and Vanuatu peoples. And he was particularly interested in the First Fleet collection, or we thought you might be particularly interested in the First Fleet collection. That was drawn up from the 1788 onwards, when the British colonized the Australian continent, in the area of Port Jackson, Varana, or now present-day Sydney. And then the third residency was by Sunoj from Bangalore, and he particularly wanted to work on this book, the Hortus Malabaricus. So I just talked you briefly through these three projects, and then I'm gonna just talk about also another project by Joy Gregory, Seeds of Empire, which was an exhibition which was where she did research on natural history material which is kept in the British Library, British Museum, and the Natural History Museum. You can see the triumvirate of institutions there, and we'll see again the protagonist of Hans Sloane, on which he worked, but the work was shown at Daniel Arnaud Gallery last year. I will put together when I go through this presentation, this triangular relationship as well between museum staff, artists, and museum visitors, just to see how they sort of benefit from each other. And here we've got the comment from museum staff. They have come in as artists and non-Europeans with a very different background and perspective on colonialism, on the European view of science, a very different take which generated discussion and raised questions not raised before. So that's our starting point. And as I mentioned, there was a great reluctance to connect imperial and colonial histories to the histories and practices of science. So this is a detail of the images of Nature Gallery, which I mentioned earlier, which was the space at which the artists could show their work. And yet again, another limitation. So there are two temporalities of the exhibition. There was a permanent display, and then there are these display cases, 5 of which there were changing displays, and I could use one of them. Again, as a particular framing for an artist's work, and makes it a very site-specific installation that you can also argue with. These are not originally from the Edwardian, so the museum is 1881, and this is actually an Edwardian case, so early 20th century. And the artist created this particular installation, Memorialized Memory, which picked up on the collecting conventions that John Reeves, the collection, whose collection he looked at from the early 19th century. And so he became interested in this, in John Reeves, who was an East India Company tea inspector, and he became a naturalist and engaged a lot of the locally based artists into creating scientific drawings, particularly of fish. So it's a very significant collection, and you need drawings because fish don't last very long, so you can't really preserve them. They are scientifically important because they are the first records for Europeans just to look at, and from this period 1812 to 1831. There's a record of the relationship that Reeves had with the draftsmen, because one knows roughly where they were, what kind of warehouses they worked in, what kind of techniques they used. But normally they're anonymous. Apart from four, so the draftsmen he calls them Akam, Ake, and Asung, were mentioned in his ledger book, and he describes the payments he makes to them, and we know there are others, but they remained anonymous. So Huynh became interested in these four draftsmen who worked under Reeves' instructions and the drawings that they made, and so for this installation, you can see on the one side you can see as kind of an epitaph to John Reeves. Everything is known about him, and and the place he has and the history of science, and for this particular studies. And on the other side here, there's a short video where you can see the same kind of structure which he created inside this cabinet, and you can see that the writing of the writing here of these four draftsmen, the naming them, is being, and actually the artist added himself to it as well, it's being erased. So you have the video being shown in reverse, and so you have the names disappearing. And it's not very sharp, but in the center you have got a panel which has the title of the installation there, but the artist's name is not there. He didn't want to be named. He wanted to acknowledge these processes of forgetting and not naming the structures that created these collections, and so he also erased his own name from this panel. And then this goes a little bit further. So first off, museum staff commented on this work. Huynh's work was invisible artwork. You could really easily miss it. This was his intention, but others didn't get it. He didn't want his name to be mentioned. He played on the conventions. Staff understood the program would be happening and expected something show-stopping, dazzling, big. It's art, isn't it? So did his subtlety and sophistication mean that they valued the work less? It was delightful, playful, and serious, disturbing preconceptions. So you can see we have got a whole range of emotion that the artist so therefore sort of tapped into. And then there's still here from the video. And then on the other side you have a drawing which he made. He himself made a lot of drawings which were then also inspired by this collection. And he wanted it to be acquisitioned into the museum collection. So it is now in the museum collection catalog. He's still named as the author in the museum's repository entry, but it states the drawing by the artist in residence was exhibited alongside the Reeves drawing in 2011 in the Images of Nature gallery, and like the Reeves artists, remained anonymous. That's the entry he wanted to have in the museum catalogue for the acquisition of this particular drawing into the scientific illustration collection. So the next work I want to show you is Sunoj, and he worked on, let me just see. It was also displayed in this display case here. Let me just go, oops. We'll go back to this. So the Hortus malabaricus is an inventory of plants, also for economic purposes. It was a very trading region in the late 1700s to early 1800s. And it's a very interesting book. It's quite a collaborative book of 742 medicinal plants were found in the area. So it had about 100 contributors. So it was really kind of a crowdsourced book. And interestingly, so there were 3 Brahmin, alongside a lot of European researchers. Then there were 3 Brahmin physicians who also contributed to the book, which is also in many languages. So there were Rangabad, Vinyaka Pandit, Apubad were also contributors, and there was also the local language of Malayalam was also used in describing these plants and in this survey of plants, which was commissioned by a Dutch commissioner. And then what particularly attracted Sunoj to this book is also a Malalai physician, Itia Huden, a doctor of the Ashavi community, also contributed to this publication, which shows plants in the European system as it was at that time, so late 1700s. And what he did, he picked up all of the plants and he drew them again, but he created this document as of a wild array and wild disorder, in contrast to the museum collection as well as to the Hortus itself. So that was one part of the work. And then the other one was that he invited lots of people, everybody, to bring in plant pots and so on, which kind of got the museum quite crazy, because you don't really bring other things in that don't go through the fridge and don't go through the official processes. So, but he was allowed to put his pots there, and we had to sort of clean them, scrub them a bit. But it's always interesting to see where the boundaries from between living and dying, which is in a museum, and this is what he wanted to play on. How alive can you get in a natural history museum? And so he's got the Hortus on the left-hand side displayed there, which so the first edition, and that was every now and then the pages were turned, so you could see various plants that were depicted in the Hortus. You can see the 2 more books there as a multi-volume edition. And then what he did also as part of his work was to create dinners. So when he came, he brought lots of spices from his hometown, and he created social situations around in people's kitchen. It's not his kitchen, but somebody from the library, actually library staff, and so he cooked for people, and so that was very much part of his practice. And we did also with colleagues. We did go and visited lots of members of the Indian community and to talk about this work and this project. So a visitor response here, because obviously that is on public display. You have got some quite traditional work and then something like that, which is more of an installation, more modern. So you are really crossing all kinds of cultures, was a nice comment by a visitor. So I'm now coming to sort of the last of this program, Daniel Boyd's work, and this is slightly after this poster which the Natural History Museum put up. But I just put it there as a sort of a pointer, because when I arrived at the museum in 2005, the museum was really stressed, because there were lots of demands coming, more and more coming, just to restitute human remains. There's a massive human remains collection in the museum, about 20,000, objects, specimens, however you want to look at them. But there's an increasing, because of a change of legislation, so increasing demands on his collection. So this post is actually a bit after the residency, which we're going to look at now, but is it is to point at that the museum didn't really quite know what to do. It was had these requests. There were legal aspects, there are cultural aspects, and they were sort of thinking, what is the situation here? What is the dialogue we can have? Who can make these claims? How do we return? And so these collections or items from it and so on. And the director ended up in court at some point because he did do some additional examination, and so it was very, very complicated. And so this was sort of a response later on as well, just to address this is on a major road in front of the museum, just to say, well, yes, we do have human remains, because for a long time they didn't really want to talk about it and acknowledge it, and it's a quite complex situation which museums actually put themselves forward in talking about it more than others. So Daniel Boyd was invited to come and research the collection. So the first fleet collection, it's always an enormous amount of stuff to look through. Over 600 drawings and watercolors created from 1788 onwards. That include landscapes and flora and fauna and portraits of individuals of the Eora nation, which I mentioned earlier, who actually lived in the Varana area, and who gone extinct fairly soon after the British settler had arrived in that area. So Boyd also created two bodies of work, which we're going to look at in more detail. They are related to this first fleet collection, and the over 600 drawings and images that he picked up from that and he reworked, and then also to the human remains debates that were going on at the time, so as we can see there on the left-hand side. So here he is installing, and he said, like an erasure of memory or history in an image or an object, the loss of information empowers me. The viewer is put in the position where they don't have that information. And so I explained it a bit through what he means by through his work, because here you have got, he did drawings on the basis of the first fleet collection. So here you have a portrait by an Eora individual. And what he does, he colors in these drawings, and then he blackens it. And then he puts it's actually a glue on top of it, so that it looks to the European eye like a pointillist technique, but is actually for him a way of obscuring the information that is below. First by having blacked up the drawing, and it's the other way around. So you put the glue first, and then he blacks it, so you can see this fragmented image that's coming through. That he describes as that's empowering him. And then the additional aspect of this is you see these boxes here, and they are actually the boxes that are now used in the anthropology collection to rehouse that. The collection was in the process of being rehoused at the time. So he takes those boxes, which are archival, normally as green cardboard, and he blacked those boxes as well as a process of appropriation. And then again, he put this array of boxes into this display case. So the work is called Up in Smoke Tour, and Up in Smoke is in reference to the habit of young British upper class men in the sort of 18th century, just to do the tour of Europe, and so that's what he refers to in this title. And this is the other part, Up in Smoke Tour, disused skull boxes. So maybe I just gonna show you this one. So that work was actually inspired by this, and so this is outside the paleontology department at the museum, and these were the boxes that were taken out in order to be replaced by these new archive boxes. And we saw those and thought, this is it. We need to have these boxes. This is the beginning of this installation. And so there was first a bit of reluctance to show those boxes. So the one on the left, actually, the blue ones, they would house photographic material that was taken during expeditions, and the ones on this side here were ones that housed, that's the term for it, human remains. And the collection is quite wide-ranging. There are some labels on these boxes. Let me just go back. And we had to be really careful what we put into the display case. So this is what I meant earlier by smoke and mirror. There's actually nothing in these boxes. It's suggestive of content, but there were obviously no objects in these boxes. It was just showing there's an archive, and an archive is in transition, and its archive is changing. And was also really important where no labels were shown. You could not potentially identify. However, there was a suggestion that these boxes might come from the Varana area and so on, but also just for your reassurance, but it didn't. There were boxes that housed skulls. So you can see that these are the ones, and there are some here in the corner there which would have longer bones, femur bones, and arm bones. And then there's photographic material. So there was a lot of suggestive material in there. And we worked really closely. At the time, the museum had a colleague who was specifically dealing with the restitution requests. And she was really grateful that her work could be made public in a way, because she's a scientist, she had no way of thinking about what this could look like for an audience in a gallery space. So there was a kind of a close collaboration with her. I mean, the artist said what he wanted to do, and we said, "Are you okay with that?" She said, "That's fine. Let's do it. Let's tweak it in this and that way." But it was a way to start talking about it in the situation where the museum felt itself quite stressed about these claims, and they didn't know how they could reread these objects that they have in their care. So this is a detail from the box. This is what some of the labels look like. Here you can see that Daniel reworked one of the drawings of the skull that he found in the first week collection. And now this is his photograph. And so he did some research into the collection, and there was a skull potentially from one of his peoples from the West Brisbane area might be in the collection, and he wanted to see it. I went with him, but I wasn't allowed into the room where he looked at this skull, which my colleague had then put out, and he took this photograph, which he chose to take and he chose to publish, which is the museum feels very doesn't want to publish images of skulls and human remains. But it was his choice to do so. I'm showing it here because he's got a book of his work, a monograph on Daniel Boyd's work, and he publishes in there. And he just did it. So just to be aware. He just, again, this was a way of reappropriating what he felt could be his, and he would have to go through the Australian government in order to put the claim and to investigate if the skull is rightfully part of his ancestry and should be returned. And that would be the process of government to governments to discussion. Okay, so here we are. We keep on talking about these projects in different fora. These are the colleagues from the studio organization, which I think is really quite key for an artist who works with difficult collections to keep some sanity when they come to another country. And just briefly, I'm just gonna. How much time have I got? So I should finish? Yeah. So this is just to say a work by Joy Gregory here is of Jamaican heritage, grew up in the country, and she worked on Hans Sloane's material. So, as a way of dealing also with natural history material, went actually to the British Library together with her collaborator, Philip Miller, a composer. and re-engage with this material in her way, and they created a number of artworks on this basis. So this was from Voyage to Jamaica, and Hans Sloan was a physician as well. He did have, what was unusual for the time, do medical case studies, 128 of them, and there was one which he labeled Index of Madness, which is it's a description of an observation over a month of a black enslaved woman who is named Rose, and who clearly suffers from mental health issues. And so he's describing that, and this is the person of madness that the artist herself, Joy Gregory, reperformed, and then found various ways of talking about this enslaved person. Shall I close here? Yeah?
I mean, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it would be lovely to continue. Okay. No applause. Okay.
Okay.
So